I watch Tanzania and my heart breaks. The land of Nyerere now chokes on the lies of his successors. The flag still waves, but it no longer represents freedom. The people speak in whispers, and the leaders pretend not to hear. It hurts to see a nation once so proud betrayed by the hands that swore to protect it. Tanzania's leaders have turned promise into betrayal. The government that once spoke of freedom now rules through fear. Their words say democracy, but their actions whisper control. The institutions that should defend justice now protect power. The leaders who were meant to serve have become masters of manipulation. The people's votes have become rituals, their voices reduced to echoes. This is not leadership, it is possession. A nation that once inspired Africa now watches its own light flicker under the weight of deceit. And the greatest tragedy is this: those who swore to defend the people have become the architects of their silence. There are moments in a nation's life when silence becomes unbearable, when the people's patience is mistaken for weakness and their loyalty for ignorance. That is where Tanzania stands today. A nation that once glowed with the optimism of progress now trembles under the weight of political betrayal. The dream of democracy, once bright, once believable, now feels like a fading echo, drowned by manipulation, intimidation, and silence. The land that once symbolized the moral discipline of Julius Nyerere, the pride of Pan-African dignity, has been reduced to a theater of political manipulation, where the actors wear the mask of democracy, but the script reeks of deceit. This is not the Tanzania Julius Nyerere dreamed of. This is a Tanzania held hostage by those who mistake power for ownership. A nation whose democracy has been hollowed out from within, leaving behind a shell of legality and the corpse of legitimacy. How did we arrive here? How did a nation that once inspired the continent with humility and vision become a sanctuary for political arrogance and institutional compromise? The truth is bitter, but necessary. Tanzania's democracy is bleeding, and those who swore to protect it are the very ones draining its lifeblood. The people are watching, their hopes dimmed, their faith in the electoral process eroded, their belief in justice fading. They still speak of democracy, but their words now carry the tone of disbelief. Because what good is a ballot when its outcome is predetermined? What good is an election when the referee already wears the ruling party's jersey? This is not merely political decay, it is a moral collapse, a betrayal of the social contract between the governed and the governors, a mockery of the sacrifices of Tanzanians who once dreamt of a nation built on equality, honesty, and service. Tanzania stands at a moral crossroads, where truth is treated as rebellion, and silence has become the new patriotism. The question is no longer whether the people can vote. The question is whether their votes still matter. Yet, amid the despair, one truth remains. The people have not forgotten what justice feels like. The pulse of Tanzania still beats with quiet defiance in the hearts of the young, in the whispers of the old, in the dreams of the disenfranchised. Because even when democracy becomes a dictate, the spirit of freedom cannot be legislated away. This is not just a political crisis, it is a moral one. And every Tanzanian must now decide, will this nation continue to descend into the pit of manipulation and fear, or will it rise again to reclaim the soul of its democracy?
Strength of Africa TV presents
Children of the sun, our story is not over, it's just begun. From Timbuktu to the streets of Soweto, Africa speaks and the world must echo. Strength of Africa, we stand.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Depending on where you are at this moment, I'm your host, Adebayo Oladokun, and this is Strength of Africa TV, where truth meets courage, where the past is reawakened and the future of the motherland is reclaimed. Today's episode is titled The Tanzanian Crossroads, When Democracy Becomes a Dictate. Let's start with the manipulation of choice. Tanzania did not lose a democracy overnight. No nation can collapse in a single day. It begins with small betrayals, each one tolerated in the name of stability, each one justified in the language of peace. The erosion of democracy is not an explosion, it is a slow suffocation. And for Tanzania, that suffocation began the moment silence became more comfortable than the truth. Once, the nation was known for its calm politics and steady progress. It was a model for the region, a land that blended order with freedom, leadership with humility. Julius Nyerere, the founding father, envisioned a Tanzania that would not rise through force, but through moral conviction. He believed in dialogue, in service, and in the power of the people to shape their destiny. But today, his vision stands on shaky ground. Every democracy rests upon one sacred promise, the right of the people to choose. But when that right becomes a ritual of deception, democracy ceases to be a covenant. It becomes a contract of control. In Tanzania today, choice has been reduced to ceremony. The people queue under the scorching sun, believing their votes will still shape their destiny. Yet, behind the curtain of power, decisions are already made. Elections have become a play without a suspense, a movie whose ending everyone already knows. The ruling party remains the victor, the opposition remains the villain, and the people remain spectators in their own democracy. The Electoral Commission, once a symbol of hope, now moves like a shadow under executive command, mechanical, predictable, and deeply compromised. When the body that should be neutral becomes an extension of the ruling class, then the ballot becomes a mockery of itself. And when trust dies, participation becomes an act of despair. Many Tanzanians now go to the polls not out of belief, but out of the habits. They have learned that in this new order, elections are not contests, they are confirmations. This manipulation is subtle but deadly. It doesn't come through soldiers and tanks. It comes through systems, through laws written to look fair but designed to favor the few. It comes through media capture, judicial silence, and the slow suffocation of dissent. The tragedy is that Tanzania, once a moral compass for the region, now stands accused of the very political gamesmanship it once condemned. It has traded the honesty of leadership for the illusion of stability. And yet, behind this mask of calm, the people whisper about their stolen voice, their invisible power, their muted destiny. A nation that manipulates choice invites rebellion in silence. For when people realize their votes no longer count, they will one day remember their numbers. And history has proven no regime survives the awakening of a betrayed people. But here is the truth Tanzania must face. A government that fears the people's voice does not lead, it rules. An electoral body that serves the government instead of the governed does not supervise, but sabotages. And a president who demands obedience instead of respect does not inspire, he intimidates. When the governed begin to doubt the very system that defines their power, democracy ceases to exist. It becomes performance. And that performance, my fellow Africans, however grand it is, cannot last forever. Now, my fellow Africans, let's look at democracy as a dictate. When democracy begins to sound like a dictate, something sacred has been lost. The Tanzanian government still calls itself democratic, but its actions betray that very word. For democracy without accountability is nothing but organized tyranny. And that's the painful truth we must confront. Tanzania's democracy today functions like a carefully written script. The leaders speak the language of freedom. The media echoes it, and the people are told to believe it, even when every experience around them says otherwise. This is not democracy. This is performance. Power now flows downward, not from the people, but from the palace. The institutions that should check power have become tools of preservation. The judiciary stands timid. The parliament echoes approvals instead of debates. And the Electoral Commission has become the ruling party's silent partner. How can democracy survive when its guardians have traded conscience for comfort? When the ones meant to protect the truth now feed the machinery of deceit. This is the tragedy of Tanzania's governance. A slow transformation of democracy into dictatorship, done not with guns, but with government gazettes, not by silencing everyone at once, but by teaching them to silence themselves. True democracy is not defined by the act of voting, but by the guarantee that the vote counts. It is not measured by the number of political parties, but by the freedom with which they can exist. But in Tanzania, freedom has been domesticated. It is tolerated only within boundaries. You may speak, but not too loudly. You may protest, but not too long. You may oppose, but not too effectively. This is the new order. Democracy by permission. A democracy that dictates who can speak, what can be said, and when it must stop. And when democracy becomes permission, freedom becomes fiction. It will deepen the emotional tone, showing how fear, not peace, has become the quiet instrument of control. The government instruments are many, but first, let's look at the law. The law is used not as a shield of justice, but as a sword of intimidation. Activists are arrested for organizing. Journalists are summoned for questioning. Parties are suspended for violating regulations that only seem to apply to those who oppose the state. Then comes the media, strangled by control, suffocated by censorship. The national narrative is carefully curated, every word edited, every image filtered, every story sanitized to protect the powerful. Independent journalists are silenced, and state broadcasters turned into echo chambers of praise. In Tanzania today, truth must pass through permission, and finally, the electoral system, the heart of democracy, now beats in rhythm with the state's desires. The electoral body designed to be the umpire now functions as the enabler. Registration rules are manipulated, observers are restricted, and results are announced with prescripted confidence. Disputes are dismissed before they are heard, and when protests arise, the government responds not with dialogue, but with force. This is not democracy. It is dominance, masquerading as legitimacy. It is the choreography of control, precise, planned, and profoundly immoral. The anatomy of manipulation may be complex, but its fate is simple. It collapses the moment people stop believing the illusion. Because power can control the media, it can control the laws, it can control the institutions, but, and I repeat, but it can never control the awakening of a people who have learned that obedience is not peace and silence is not stability. Now, my audience, to the silenced majority, fear as a tool of governance. No government survives without the consent of its people. but some survive by manufacturing that consent through fear. In today's Tanzania, fear has become the invisible constitution, unspoken, unwritten, but obeyed by all. It is the most effective policy ever crafted because it governs without appearing to exist. Fear sits in every newsroom where journalists choose which truth is safe to tell. It walks into classrooms where teachers skip chapters that may awaken consciousness. It hovers over the heads of activists who must choose between courage and survival. Fear has been institutionalized, woven into policies, enforced through security agencies, and normalized in public discourse. The government no longer asks for loyalty, it demands silence. It no longer inspires trust, it imposes obedience. The government speaks of peace, but what it truly enforces is silence. It claims to protect unity, but it demands obedience. And under this illusion of calm, a quiet oppression unfolds. The opposition cannot organize without suspicion. Civic movements cannot mobilize without surveillance. Even the common citizen has learned the art of cautious speech. To think twice before posting, to whisper where it should be speaking, to endure where it should resist. Fear has replaced law. It dictates what can be said, what can be questioned, and even what can be dreamed. And in that climate, democracy becomes a shadow, existing in name, but absent in spirit. The saddest part is not that the people are afraid. It is that the government believes this fear is a sign of stability. They confuse silence for order and submission for peace. But peace without justice is an illusion, a silence waiting to explode. And when fear becomes the foundation of governance, the people's courage becomes its greatest threat. Tanzania's rulers may silence the crowd, but they cannot silence conscience. They may cage the body, but they cannot cage conviction. The tragedy is that fear has not only conquered the people, it has also corrupted the rulers. Those in power live in paranoia, surrounded by praise singers who dare not to tell the truth. Every act of repression reveals weakness, not strength. Every journalist jailed, every protest crushed, every critic silenced is an admission that legitimacy is sleeping. The Tanzanian government may control speech, but it cannot control thoughts. It may silence voices, but it cannot silence memory. And memory is a dangerous thing. Because people do not forget injustice, they store it. Because history has shown fear can delay freedom, but it can never defeat it. My fellow Africans, let's examine the cost of silence. When a nation forgets to feel, silence is not peace, it is paralysis. And Tanzania today is drowning in it. The silence that once came from humility has now become the silence of hopelessness. It is the silence of citizens who have learned that speaking truth invites punishment, that questioning power ends suspicion, and that believing in democracy is now an act of naivety. But silence has a cost, and that cost is the death of a nation's soul. When a people stop feeling outrage, corruption multiplies. When they stop caring, injustice thrives. And when they stop believing, tyranny wins without a fight. This is the tragedy of Tanzania's current state. Not only that our institutions have failed, but that our people are being conditioned to accept failure as normal. The media now reports without conviction. The courts deliver judgments without justice. And the people beaten down by repetition simply sigh and move on. This is how nations decay, not through explosions, but through erosion. Not through war, but through weary acceptance. Not when citizens shout, but when they no longer bother to. Every corrupt decision that goes unchallenged becomes part of the system. Every injustice tolerated becomes tradition, and every silence becomes a seed for another betrayer. A nation dies long before it collapses. It dies when its people stop feeling. It dies when pain no longer provokes response. It dies when injustice becomes ordinary. Tanzania's danger today is not only political, it is emotional. The people are losing their connection to hope. They still dream, but the dream no longer believes in them. Yet, no matter how long silence reigns, it can never last forever. Because silence carries within it the echo of its own rebellion. And when the people finally remember how to feel, they will also remember how to fight. The danger of this silence goes beyond borders. When Tanzania, a nation that once embodied dignity and dialogue, falls into the apse, it sends a chilling message to the rest of Africa that even the strong can bow to manipulation, and even the hopeful can be subdued by fear. Now, let's have a look at the African reflection. When one nation's fall becomes a continental lesson. Africa is a mirror. When one nation trembles, all others should pay attention. Because tyranny does not begin at the continental level. It begins quietly, one border at a time. Africa is not a continent of isolated nations. She's a body of connected destinies. When one part bleeds, the whole body feels the pain. And today, Tanzania's wound is Africa's reflection. What we see in Tanzania is not an exception, it is a symptom. The manipulation of power, the silencing of conscience, the domestication of democracy. These are no longer national diseases. They are continental epidemics. Across the continent, governments rise in the name of the people, but rule in fear of those same people. They speak the grammar of freedom, but live by the syntax of control. Tanzania once stood as the moral north of Africa, a beacon of socialist honesty under Nyerere, a nation where leadership was service, not entitlement. But now, even the land of Ujamaa has been swallowed by the same virus of vanity, where leaders chase power, not purpose, and institutions serve men, not principles. Africa should not mock Tanzania. She should mourn and learn. For what Tanzania is going through today, many African nations have gone through, and others are preparing to. Every African nation must ask itself a simple but haunting question. Are we governed by leaders or by the lords? By servants or by masters? By patriots or by pretenders? Because as long as we confuse leadership with domination, our freedom will always be fragile. And as long as we measure progress by the longevity of politicians rather than the welfare of citizens, our democracy will always remain an illusion. And when the people complain, they are told to be patient, to be peaceful, to protect national unity, as if unity means silence and peace means submission. But Africa must understand the silence of one nation strengthens the chains of all. If Tanzania's democracy falls, so does Africa's moral confidence. If our people lose faith, so does the continent's collective hope. So let every African watch closely. For what is happening in Tanzania today is not just their story, it is a warning. A warning that democracy without integrity is dictatorship with better branding. Now the rebirth, the people's mandate beyond the ballots. Every fall, if understood, carries within it the seed of rebirth. Tanzania's crisis is not merely a story of failure, it is a call for rediscovery. a call for the people to reclaim what was always theirs, the mandate beyond the ballot. Democracy was never meant to end at the polling station. It was meant to begin there. But over the years, power has reduced citizenship to a 5-year ritual of hope, followed by years of betrayal. Now, it is time for the Tanzanian people, and indeed all Africans, to redefine democracy, not as an event, but as an existence, not as a right given by politicians, but as a responsibility owned by citizens. The rebirth begins not with noise, but with awareness. When the citizens learn that leadership is a reflection of the people's tolerance, and that silence is consent dressed as peace, the people's mandate goes beyond who wins an election. It is about who owns the conscience of the nation. It is about a people who refuse to be used, a generation that refuses to be deceived, and a society that refuses to normalize corruption. Because the people's mandate begins where the politicians' promise ends. It is the unspoken truth that no government can govern forever against the will of its people. This rebirth is not political, it is spiritual. It is the awakening of national consciousness after years of manipulation. It is the realization that the real power of Tanzania has never been in the hands of those who rule, but in the hearts of those who endure. Let this be the new definition of citizenship: to be awake when others choose to sleep, to speak when silence becomes betrayal, and to hope not as an escape, but as a responsibility. The people's mandate beyond the ballot is the ultimate act of liberation, where Tanzanians no longer beg for justice, but become justice, where they no longer wait for reform, but become the reform. Because when the people begin to think beyond the ballot, no regime, no manipulation, and no deceit can contain them. And from that awakening will rise not just a new Tanzania, but a new Africa, disciplined by disappointment and reborn through truth. For too long, Africa has been told that power flows from the top, but history whispers another truth. Every empire that rose on the silence of its people eventually fell to this roar of their awakening. My people, this is a continental call, Africa's moral reawakening. Africa stands once again at the crossroads of destiny, between the echoes of its past and the promise of its rebirth. And Tanzania, in all our current struggles, is the reflection of that truth, that no nation can rise above the moral temperature of its people. Africa does not fall by coups anymore. She falls by consent. Not the consent of the governed, but the consent of the silent. And Tanzania's pain has become the echo of that silence across the continent. From Dar es Salaam to Dakar, from Lusaka to Lagos, the story is the same. A people who love their nations, but are betrayed by those who lead them. A continent rich in vision, but poor in virtue. Blessed with resources, yet burdened by greed. Tanzania's democracy has stumbled, but it's not alone. Africa is full of nations that hold elections every 5 years or 4 years, but postpone justice every day. Nations where the constitution protects power, not people. Where leaders swear by the book, but rule by impulse. This is the moral crisis of our generation. Our problem is not just corruption. It is the normalization of corruption. Our tragedy is not failed leadership. It's our tolerance for it. The Tanzanian experience reminds us that democracy without ethics is merely organized chaos. That a nation without moral compass, no matter how prosperous it appears, is only marching towards its own erosion. And that people, when disconnected from purpose, becomes poison. Tanzania's struggle must therefore become a continental mirror, because when one nation loses its moral footing, it shakes the balance of all. And when one people surrender their voice, others inherit their silence. Africa needs a moral reawakening, a revolution not of bullets, but of character, a movement not of crowds, but of conscience. We must return to the essence of leadership, service, not survival. We must rebuild the soul of governance, where justice is not negotiated and truth is not seasonal. This reawakening will not be led by politicians. It will be led by thinkers, workers, mothers, students, by those who still believe that Africa's dignity is not for sale, by those who refuse to trade conscience for convenience. Because the destiny of Africa will never be written in parliaments. It will be rewritten in the hearts of our people. Let the Tanzanian crisis be Africa's last warning that democracy without morality is a shadow of its promise, and that freedom without responsibility is nothing but chaos with a flag. It is time to rise, not in anger, but in awakening, not to destroy, but to rebuild, not to curse our leaders, but to outgrow them. This is Africa's call. The call to remember that the crown of freedom is not won by those who win elections, but by those who win back their conscience. The winds of change are blowing again across the continent, but this time they carry not slogans, they carry spirits. The spirit of a people who have remembered who they are and what they deserve. The spirit of a continent on the verge of its moral rebirth. My fellow Africans, there comes a time in every nation's history when silence can no longer protect, when neutrality becomes betrayal, when pretending not to see becomes a sin of its own. That time for Tanzania and for Africa is now. For too long, we have mistaken silence for wisdom and endurance for peace. We have tolerated the intolerable, forgiven the unrepentant, and excused the inexcusable, all in the name of stability. But stability without justice is slavery with bearer branding, and peace without truth is the quiet death of a people's soul. Tanzania's current crisis is not an isolated wound. It is Africa's collective scar. It reminds us of how easily liberty can be lost when vigilance sleeps. It warns us that democracy without accountability is nothing but dictatorship in disguise. Yet, amid the disappointment, there's still a pulse, the faint heartbeat of awakening. A new generation is rising. They may not carry guns, but they carry awareness. They may not march in the streets, but they mobilize in the mind. They are not the loudest, they are the most alive. They are the children of conscience, the sons and daughters of the soil who refuse to inherit silence. The thinkers, the builders, the dreamers, who understand that true freedom is not won once, but renewed every dawn. Tanzania's struggle, though painful, has reopened the eyes of a continent. It has forced us to confront the question we often avoid. What is the meaning of independence if the people still live in fear? What is the purpose of elections if the results are predetermined? What is the point of sovereignty if truth itself is treated as treason? Africa must now reclaim our true voice, not the echo of colonial scripts, not the imitation of Western democracy, but our authentic moral reading, a democracy that flows from her values, a leadership that grows from her conscience, a freedom that reflects our soul. Tanzania's story will be remembered, not as a tale of failure, but as the spark of Africa's second liberation. A liberation not fought with weapons, but with wisdom. Not demanded by force, but by faith. Not led by politicians, but by people who have remembered what it means to feel, to care, and to rise. And as the sun sets on one chapter of deception, it will rise again on a new dawn of dignity. A dawn where truth becomes law, where leadership becomes service, and where Africa, long silenced by history, begins to sing her own song again, loud, proud, and free. Because in the end, no regime, no ruler, no empire can silence the rhythm of a reborn continent. Africa's time is not coming, it has come. And the world will remember this generation, not for what it endured, but for how it finally stood. I won't pretend to be unmoved by what is happening in Tanzania. It cuts deep, because this was a nation that once stood for dignity, for honesty, and for hope. To watch it slip into silence, to see fear replace faith, feels like losing a piece of Africa's soul. This is not just politics, it is personal. Because when Tanzania falls, it reminds us all how fragile freedom can be and how much courage it takes to win it back. My brothers and sisters in Tanzania, listen to me, please. Your story is not over, and your light is not lost. No government can outshine the spirit of a people united in purpose. Now, more than ever, Tanzania needs unity, not division. Dialogue, not destruction. Reconciliation, not revenge. Remember who you are, the children of Nyerere, built on peace, dignity, and mutual respect. Let your courage speak, but let your wisdom guide it. Because the future will not be won by anger, but by people who choose to heal together and rise as one Tanzania. I'm your host, Adebayo Oladokun, and this is Strength of Africa TV. If you found value in this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Deezer. Watch out for the next episode. You don't want to miss it. Until then, tell your own story, because Africa's future is written in African ink. Stay rooted, stay bold, stay African. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next episode. Bye.
Arouse about children of the sun. Our story is not over, it's just begun. From Timbuktu to the streets of Soweto, Africa speaks and the world must echo. Strength of Africa, we stand strong.